Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with my co-host Brian Tankersley. And everybody's becoming an AI expert. I just can't turn around without somebody else claiming they're an AI expert.
My God, it's like social media experts were 15, 20 years ago. Everybody that graduated from high school suddenly was an enterprise, social media expert.
Yeah, and at the
Amazing.
risk of making our listeners cringe, it's like fingernails on the chalkboard when I watch people talk about AI, and it's like, oh my, as my associate and friend George Takei would say, oh my. But today, Brian and I would like to talk a little bit about ChatGPT and Copilot prompting, or sometimes called prompt engineering. Now, there's other platforms that we also could do this for with Google's Gemini or Claude's, Anthropic's Claude. All of those are very interesting, but prompting is more about getting what you want. So, Brian, give us an idea what we should want.
Well, and I think you've got to decide. You've got to decide how you want to handle it. You've got to decide. There are a lot of things that you can get out of this. Okay, so it's a very powerful tool, and like any powerful tool, like Microsoft Access or Microsoft SQL, if you don't know what you want when you sit down to do it, you're not going to get what you want. You're going to get something else. Okay. So I want to talk first about prompt matters. Okay. And I'm going to give you an example from my personal life. Okay. My son, my son is, lives with us, and he's an adult now. He's in community college. And one of the ways he earns his keep is he does laundry. He takes the garbage cans to the street. He's got a lot of chores. Okay. But unfortunately, we have to manage him to get those chores done. And so I want to talk about the prompts that I use with him. Okay. Because I don't want to be too direct too early with him, but I want to encourage him to so that he can get that sense of accomplishment that comes from taking care of things yourself. Okay. So the prompts absolutely matter. Now, for our perspective here, Monday morning is garbage day. Sunday at 5 p.m., I say to my son, hey, tomorrow's garbage day. Don't forget to collect everything and put it in the cans on the street. Okay. Of course, he keeps playing his video game and ignores me. 7 o'clock, I look out. What's the plan on the garbage cans? Okay. 9 o'clock, I look out at the camera that you're actually looking at the view from. It's on the corner of the house, and they're not there. And I say garbage cans now. Okay. Now, if I have to go to Monday morning, I get his phone and his headphones, and I wake him up from a dead sleep, and I say, cans are still not on the street. I have your phone. I'm going to hang on to it until it gets done. I start reading text messages in 10 minutes. I'll wait. Okay. And so he doesn't want any part of me getting in the middle of that. And so I mentioned that to you here because, again, in this context, my son and I have a history on this. Okay. And if I come in with that last final, you've got to do this or I'm going to be a tyrant, he's going to think I'm a tyrant. Okay. So I'd rather do this. I know he's in the middle of a video game. Nobody's going to die if he doesn't put it out until 8:29 Monday morning, but it must get put on the street. Okay. And so the context is critical in here to how I do the prompt. Okay. To what I want and what is really required. Okay. And so I think this whole, so putting the context in place here is important because all of these large language models learn from statistical relationships between text. So the more context you give, the easier it gets. Now, there is a conflict between confidentiality and usability in here, okay? And so we have to be very careful about when we're using these tools because we don't necessarily want our interactions to be retained for use in future content.
So,
Okay.
Brian, I'm going to stop you there for just a minute because I wanted you to tell your story uninterrupted with the son and the garbage can. And I know Brian and I know his son. I've known him since he was born. And so, the son is actually pretty responsible, but he does like to play his games. And, you heard Brian say, I'm going to read your text. I'm thinking about confidentiality there, as you were saying that, Brian. And Brian's not much of a hard nose. He's about as laid back as he can get. But, when he gets aggravated, he's aggravated. And so,
Well, the problem is you have when mama's not happy, nobody's happy. And if those garbage cans do not get taken away, mama is hard to live with. Okay.
understood. So I just wanted to kind of frame this. Brian and I are both pretty laid back in our lives and career, and we're pretty lucky with all of our families. But the story here, as it continues to unfold, you'll see why it's so germane to the prompting that has to happen with AI. So I'm going to turn you loose again as you're talking about Groundhog Day and
Now,
confidentiality.
Now, again, there is a conflict between confidentiality and usability. Okay. So it is harder when you're starting out with ChatGPT and these other things because you don't know what you want and you don't know what the privacy is. We're going to do a whole session on privacy that I think is going to be our next episode of the technology lab. And we're going to talk about this. And I'll tell you which plans have privacy and which plans don't, and which copilots have privacy and which ones don't. But these large language models are very good at surfacing and summarizing content. Okay, so you don't want to put confidential stuff into them. That especially stuff that's regulated under regulations like HIPAA or FERPA, or for educational institutions, or again GLBA, or again anything tax related. You don't want to put into these things unless you know that the data is not going to get used for training in here. Okay, so I want you to get here that this conflict between confidentiality and usability is really important, because there are things that you can do from a usability perspective and problems you can solve with ChatGPT that you don't want to. Okay, great example of this: banks turning bank statements into CSV files. Okay, you can absolutely feed images of bank statements into ChatGPT and have it create CSV files from it. Okay. The problem is you're putting all that information into ChatGPT, and potentially that can be used for training purposes and so forth. And if you don't do it exactly right, you may have some big compliance problems and data breach responsibilities to deal with. Now, let's talk about prompts here, okay? And the ultimate prompt is a pickup line. And so, as we're looking at this now, this is a piece of this is actually a graphic that I created here. But again, it's a way of starting a conversation. And again, there are threads, and you go back and forth like a chat with ChatGPT and these tools. So, again, with prompts, it's like a pickup line in a singles bar, or an information, or again giving guidance. The more what you're really trying to do in a singles bar when you're meeting those folks is again, you're looking for life's next partner. You're actually trying to start a conversation, and then to figure out if you have anything in common, and to qualify this person and see, do they want the same things in life I want. Okay, so it really is a sales process. As we look at this now, this is a graphic that I had it create for me. And here's the prompt I used. Okay. Create a drawing which shows a man using a pickup line on a robot who looks like a woman at a bar. The bar should include 0 and 1 characters in a waterfall similar to the Matrix movies, and the woman should be drinking from a can labeled data. Okay. So this is the first attempt in here. And one thing I'll say about this is that I thought it was actually a pretty good thing. The woman seemed to be a little bit overly sexualized, the robot. But other than that, I thought it was a particularly good graphic. Now, one of the things you got to learn about prompts is that you could submit the same prompt over and over to ChatGPT or to Copilot, and we'll come up with slightly different answers every time. So now I came through and I said, in the next thread in the conversation, create another version, except the man and the robot should both be accounting professionals. And look at that, they both have on jackets. Okay. And so there it is. Now, then I did another one in here, and in this one, I said, create another version of the graphic where the robot and the person are sitting at the bar. Behind them is a wall of liquor bottles, all labeled data in the background behind the characters. And you can see, by the way, that it didn't spell data right on any of those individual liquor bottles. If you zoom in on them here, some of them say DTA, and DATI, DIA. Again, it's like they've already started drinking when you put spelled the stuff on there or something. But the shelves, again, have the labels. And then I described some other things in here. Notice it didn't do some of the things I asked it to do. So I asked it to put in there web crawling, social media scraping, and confidential financial information, labeling the levels of the bar, and it didn't do that. Okay, I had an idea, and it just said, no, I'm not going to do that. Then I ran some additional ones, and here are some of the other ones, again, that it came up with. Notice the GPT rule street and things like that. Here's another one we have. I then took all of the previous guidance in here that I had, and I said, okay, let's create the one to rule all answers. And so I had this huge prompt in here, and I want you to see this because there are a few lessons for you to take away from this. Okay, the first one is, this is an iterative process. Okay, so you're going to try something and it's not going to be exactly what you want. Then you're going to figure out how to do it differently, and then you're going to ask it to revise and do things differently. Okay. The second thing here is that you may want to save the prompt that you create. And I actually have a OneNote notebook I use with this, where when I have a prompt that works particularly well, I copy and paste it and throw it into OneNote so I can search it and use it later. Now, so you can see it created this graphic. Now, here's and again, this is the same one in here. I then said, hey, I really like that. And I said, okay, now I need you to make it in a widescreen format. And here is the widescreen format of it that it did. Notice it was significantly different than the previous one. But what I want you to get about this is that what it's really doing for you is it's really giving you ideas. Okay. And by the way, if I didn't like this one, I would have made 10 other ones and then picked the one out of them that I liked. Okay. Again, you have to note here, when it comes to the graphic creation stuff in here, even on the most modern version of this, the spelling, there will be typos in the spelling. Okay. And again, if you look at these, it's not quite lorem ipsum, that text they put in when they're demonstrating fonts, but nothing is spelled correctly in here. So if you're particularly OCD about spelling, like many of us are in the accounting profession, that's something to know. So anyway, we'll talk more about prompts here in a second, Randy, but any comments on that thus far? Can't hear you.
Sorry. What I wanted our listeners to hear and understand is Brian was going through a series of prompts trying to tune up the conversation. And you can teach these prompts to your team, and you can tune up your prompts, and you can save your prompts. And it's going to take a little bit for the engine first to know who you are and what you're like. In ChatGPT, for example, there's a place where you can tell it, your preferences, and you should do that. But over time, you will find that the engines will actually become a little more refined as you go forward. So, in effect, prompt engineering, the way you talk about the prompts, is important. There's debate in the marketplace if politeness gets better results or not, or whether brevity gets better results or more completeness gets better results. And, my experience on that has been, it just seems to vary over time, even within different AI engines. So, just because of my personality, I tend to be a little more polite in the way I ask things, but I also tend to be kind of brief. And I think the engines do a little bit better with more detail. And I tend not to supply that detail early on. I want to get it in the zone first. So just like the first prompt that Brian said that the female at the bar was a little over-sexualized, that was probably true. And, he might have been more specific if he'd have thought about it, saying, a very smart female that's attractive. But
yeah, conservatively dressed,
conservatively dressed. Those types of things would really help. But the key here is, as accountants, we have to be able to specifically say what we're looking for. And we have to recognize that the accuracy of certain things are still going to be messed up. But all of these things, once you learned how to use the prompts, kind of like you've learned how to use search engines now that they've become a lot more popular, you kind of know how to search to get what you want. But my bet is that most of you aren't very refined at your searching. I know many people that are very refined at their searching that get much better results much more quickly. But again, I tend to be kind of loosey-goosey on the searching too. I know a few tricks that help me, but I'm not really, really refined on my search engine prompts either.
And I think one of the things about this iterative thing with prompting is that generally we don't know exactly what we want. We know we have an idea of kind of the general territory. Like when I was doing those graphics that I showed you there for example, and I was actually doing them for this presentation because I wanted to have those, that conversation as a graphic. However, I didn't know exactly what I wanted until I got through here. And so that's in here. Now, I want to remind you here that large language models are different from the other things you've done with computers in the past. Okay. In the past, when you had ran Excel, or you ran a report out of QuickBooks, or you created a document in Microsoft Word, it had the features to go through and handle all of those things that we had going on. So it would make sure that everything was absolutely accurate all the time. And so you need to understand with respect to generative AI that it will not only be inaccurate, okay? And that's one of the reasons I pointed out the spelling on those graphics. It will not only be inaccurate, sometimes it will just make up things out of whole cloth. Okay, so we were running bios on people through ChatGPT just to see how well it would create bios for a conference. And we ran a bio on our friend Doug Sleater, and ChatGPT 3.5 told me that Doug was dead. Doug thought that was hilarious. Okay. But I'm sharing it with you here because you have to understand that this is not like a traditional, when you're doing stuff with AI, this is not like a traditional computer application where you can trust that it is absolutely correct and that the data you put in is absolutely what came out. Notice that when I asked it to do certain things, it just ignored me altogether. Okay. And in other places, it just made up new things that I didn't ask it to do. Okay.
So, just a reminder, in prior technology labs, we've talked about hallucinations. We've talked about what different language models can do. Today, most of our context is around ChatGPT and Microsoft 365 Copilot, which happen to be the same basic engine, but large language models. So, this idea of making stuff up, you can learn more about that in a prior accounting technology lab. But Brian, as you're thinking about this, Microsoft has actually put out pretty good guidance on Copilot where
Yeah.
they suggest that the best ingredients, and through the years, you've used lots of cooking analogies in our presentations you've created. You did that for business intelligence here recently as an example. But they suggest that you start with a goal, what output you want from Copilot, the context, why do you need it and who's involved, the source, which information sources or samples should Copilot use. Pointing to the right sources could be good. And for accountants, going to authoritative sources is quite good. Now, in other technology labs, we'll talk about the tax research tools, for example, Thomson Reuters, Edge, Co-Counsel, or we'll look at what Wolters Kluwer has done with the Answer Connect and their AI additions, but they are authoritative sources, which is interesting. And then, of course, preferences. What do we want Copilot to do to meet our preferences? So those ideas, goal, context, source, and preferences is really solid guidance.
Yeah, and absolutely, Randy, and I think that's the critical piece here. Now, this is OpenAI also has a guide to prompt engineering. Okay, and I've got the link there. But again, you can actually again go out to the OpenAI website and see this. But their principles are to write clear instructions, provide reference text, split tasks into subtasks, give the model time to think, use external tools, and then test changes systematically. Okay. And so there's much more in that particular guide, but there are also there's an open AI cookbook that talks about different things you can do and different kinds of prompts you can create. And there are many prompt examples out here. So if you go out now to For example, this OpenAI tool in here, you can see that they have different ideas of things here. You know, when the reason I do the recipes, Randy, is that when my mother sent me off to college, when I got my first apartment, one of the housewarming gifts she gave me was a book that I still have in my kitchen called The Joy of Cooking that had a lot of recipes. Okay. And so I would just encourage you to look at these prompt examples and other pieces like this. I mean, look at this rap battle writer. Okay. You know, I've never needed that in my entire life. And in all the years, all those laps around the sun that I've done, I've never needed a rap battle writer. But look, there's an example of one if I need it. Oh, look, an emoji chatbot. Okay. So Marv, the sarcastic chatbot. Okay. So I'm just kind of showing those to you here because I think it's important that you look at what other people do the same way that you know, again, I didn't decide I was going to follow Julia Child, one of the great masters of cooking, but I decided that I was just going to try out things with effectively this recipe book.
Yeah, and you know, as you're thinking about these prompt libraries, and you showed a lot of the pictures in the video version of this podcast, the results, but it turns out that we're going to have AI solving all sorts of situations. For example, a new generative AI for music is called Suno, S-U-N-O, and it just generates music from prompts like Brian's been teaching you. And that is amazing to me, simply amazing. Well, we'll let you continue with prompt libraries
Yeah.
here.
So with libraries, I have a spreadsheet actually that I use for these. The idea here is that you can save these into you can save these, you can create templates for you here. I've actually got a spreadsheet I'd be glad to send to you if you want it. But the idea here is I've taken those goal, context, source, preferences, and then I write a sentence for each of those, and then it feeds it together, and then I can copy and paste that into ChatGPT to have that create a prompt. Another one we have here, this is another framework from somebody else, and so there I've got a list in this of different roles. I have a list of results I want. I have a list of explanations and audiences and tones and explanations. Again, there you can customize this, make this whatever you want. But the idea that I've got here is I've got it set up where you can just pick these from the list, from the drop down, and then it will go through and actually revise and create a sentence. So you see, we have Portfolio Manager right now. Let's just trade this one out and let's pick a different context. Let's say you are an accounting professional. And then the result that you want to have here is going to be, let's go down here to edit. Let's make this explain. Okay. And so now notice that it has gone through here and it's created these 6 sentences in here. And I know that this seems overly simplistic, but this is an approach to get the conversation started. Okay.
Yeah.
So think
So
of it
now,
as ChatGPT
Brian,
pickup line generator.
yeah. So Brian, at the risk of stepping on you there, I just wanted to make sure our listeners knew that you offered to send this prompt template. It's a well done prompt template. It'll save you hours of creation. We've been talking about, using templates, and we've got complex ones. This one is a simple starting point for you. And I would encourage you to make that request to either of
Actually,
us.
let's do this. I'll actually hang it off of my website, cpatechblog.com. I'll upload it to this before this thing goes live, so you can download it from there. And I'll also send it to Isaac so he can put it with the magazine.
That's beautiful. Well, Brian, I know you've got more you could be teaching about prompting. What are some closing thoughts here? I know you've got a couple of more that you wanted to make.
Again, I think this idea of using an Excel workbook or saving these things is important. You're gonna look. This is like any skill you have. Okay, and you know my son right now is taking English 101 for the second time in community college, because he's not great at writing essays and expressing his thoughts and things like that. Okay. And it's the same thing I'd say about prompting is the same thing I'd say about him. Okay. You're not going to be good when you start. Okay. The important thing is to start. Okay. You're going to start out and you're going to make some really bad sausage. Okay. You're going to get closer to filet mignon as you develop your skills. but I want you to get that when you're creating these prompts in here, you're going to get better at it, and then you're going to come up with prompts that work for you, and they're going to work great. Okay, and then OpenAI or Microsoft is going to have changes to the model, and you're going to have to change them up. Okay, so I want you to get that it will change around some, but that's what I just suggest here. And again, I'd say the same thing to you that I would say to him. It doesn't matter how bad the first one is, it just matters that you get started. Okay, so Randy, I'll let you close us out here.
I've let you run today for a lot of different reasons because I knew that your preparation in this area, your research in this area could help all of our listeners. The template that's been offered also is a big gain. I'm going to tell you, we'll continue to refine our knowledge and pass it on to you in this area. And again, watch who you're listening to on AI out there, because unfortunately, there's too many social media gurus and snake oil salesmen trying to, tell you that you can have whiter teeth and fresher breath if you just use their AI methodologies.
And nobody's going to pimp out your private data, but you need to pay very careful attention to that, because you cannot take back that private data that you put into the models. And there's research that shows that there's memorization that happens with the training that really can be devastating to your ability to keep things private.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.